And we're live, Darren. Welcome to Talk About It Tuesdays. I am your lady G, host of the hour. Our co-host, Bo Black, is on vacation. So, Bo, I hope you're out there enjoying yourself. We will see you very soon. Today we have joining us a very special guest, musician Darren Thompson. He is with the Lac du Flambeau Ojibwe Reservation. And did I pronounce that right, Darren?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, good. Great. Darren has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, National Public Radio, amongst other different publications. And his work is still getting a lot of notoriety. So thank you, Darren, for joining us and taking the time. Before we jump into all the things we're going to talk about today, I understand that there are several tribes within the Ojibwe Nation. Can you explain that a little bit for those of us who are ignorant?
Sure.
Or clans, I should say, not tribes.
Well, actually, both are correct. So there are different tribes. So essentially, the Ojibwe tribe is essentially one tribe, but there are different bands, and the way that you can describe them as they're just different groups. And depending on region or geography, it will determine a number of things like who the families are, what their interactions are with their neighbors, different various governments. And so essentially, I know it can be confusing, but essentially Ojibwe, Ojibwa, and Chippewa were all the same people, were all the same tribe. And why those pronunciations are different varies for a few reasons. One of them is culture, and what I mean by culture is people speak language differently based upon region, and our people are no different. As a result of that, some of our people say our vowels a little differently than others, and over the years of interacting with people, that would have changed the way that people referenced us. So to make a long story longer, the Ojibwe people, we are one of the largest tribes in North America with populations in both the United States and Canada.
Oh, so, wow. Nice.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So a lot of what you do is around artistry. Your music is your art and your form, and somehow you've been able to use that as a means to also create commentary and to address social issues, and possibly even activism type of work. So your photographs that you've been taking are just absolutely beautiful, and we're going to share a few of those this evening. But this one right here was captured at the George Floyd Memorial in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I know that you had a firsthand experience with that whole uprising that took place because you're in that locale. Do you want to talk about any of that and what it looked like for you?
Sure, that's a really broad question. And, we can go in many different directions with what had happened. And so I'm a transplant here to the Twin Cities. I used to live, prior to living here, in the Black Hills of South Dakota, which is about 700 miles west of where I'm at. And furthermore, it's about 800 miles west of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or the Great Lakes. And it is a much slower paced environment, and I went out there to pursue my art at an organization that we can talk about a little later. But after I had transplanted, there were a number of things that were happening, and one of them was an incident that influenced pretty much the entire country to take to the streets and to address issues that our society has been attempting to address for generations. So this isn't a new thing. And initially, I had stayed back. I didn't want to just be a bandwagon type person where something might be a fad and I'll just jump out and join the streets. And so, what initially took me to wanting to document and witness what was going on was there was a fire that had, there were protests that turned into riots. And what I mean by riots is buildings started to be destroyed. There were some fires that were set, and before the dust settles, we always know that there are. So I might be faulty when I say we always know, and so when I say we, I imply those that I befriend, and those that I befriend understand that there are both sides to every story. And what I mean by that is, fast forward, the fires that we initially saw were proved to have been instigated by law enforcement and people associated with law enforcement in Minneapolis in this regard. So when I seen the destruction, I thought, this is more serious than the media was covering. And so I have some media background, not particularly in regards to investigative or breaking news situations, but there's really no challenge when it comes to sharing the truth. And so what I mean by sharing the truth is that if I'm there, I'm a direct witness. And if I'm a direct witness, I'm going to share whatever photography, whatever journalism, interviews, and or video work that I'm able to produce. And it was such a widely monitored, attended event. And I hate to call it an event, but just a incident and a series of things that were happening in front of our eyes that I ended up spending a good 12 straight days of covering the different protests, and there were many of them happening in both cities and, of course, other locations throughout the world. And so I had felt, I'm a human being, and when you go out there, a lot of people are intimidated, a lot of people are scared that they may be targeted and or bullied by police, and that's not necessarily the case, even though there are documentations of things like that happening. Protesting is a right that is protected by the Constitution. I realize how fad like that sounds, but it really is a true right that separates the development of our human history. What I mean by that is a lot of people don't realize and look back to the right to protest previously didn't exist to the creation of the current government that we are all abiding by today. Because in times past, if we were to say anything against any governing body, that could equal death for many and or any reasons. And so seeing these situations and events as a human being, I couldn't help but be moved, influenced, and of course touched by the collective action by many people's what was happening in regards to what was happening in their community. These are serious things, and we place trust blindly as we're experiencing into people to participate in our community, and that's right and wrong, and fair and unfair. And as we experience these situations, we continue to learn, we continue to strive to improve and become better people, better communities.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to share some of the footage that you took along the way, and other photographs that you have, which I think are absolutely just timely. But I noticed this achievement of yours, and you won the best photograph for the 2017 North Dakota Human Rights Film and Arts Festival. Talk about this. And this is the photograph that you did.
Sure. So this photograph was actually somewhat of an accident. The photographer is a man by the name of Shane Balkowicz, who lives in Bismarck, North Dakota, which was where this photo was taken as well. And at the time the photo was taken, I wasn't living in North Dakota. I never lived in North Dakota. I actually lived at the time in South Dakota. And although it's just a border separates, where I lived was about 500 miles away. So it wasn't particularly, around the corner. But the photo depicts me with a noose around my neck. And at the time that this photo was taken was at the height of the protests and discussion of what was going on near the Standing Rock Sioux Indian Reservation, which was the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline. And so the man who started taking these types of photos, when I say these types, I mean, you see the tin type or the black and white carbon photos. This is an old style. The most famous photograph of an American Indian person was taken of a man by the name of Sitting Bull, and it was taken in Bismarck, North Dakota in the 1880s. I don't remember the exact year, but if you look up photos of American Indian, if you just type that photo is going to show up. And so this style, the way that it was made a long time ago is not the way that we snap photos today. The exposure time is different. The approach is different. It's a real production. Not saying that other photos and how they're made are not real either, but what I mean by that is it takes some organizing and it takes a significant amount of time to take this photo. This photo is supposed to correlate the largest mass hanging in United States history, which is in 1868, which was in Mankato, Minnesota, which included 36 Dakota men who were hung in the town square the day after Christmas, which was December 26th. There were two others who were later hung, and the reason for their hangings were that they were upset with the treaty arrangements that they had made with the United States government. The arrangements are vast, but what it ultimately referred to was the transfer of food. So when a people, particularly here in the United States, gave up their land, they gave up their access to the land. And when they gave up their access to the land, they gave up their access to the food, which was food that they had been living off for countless generations. And as a result of that, you have something that need to be supplemented so that the people can continue to provide for themselves, which was an arrangement that was made by the treaties, which meant that the United States government would provide rations of food. In this particular case, the most commonly available food that was available was salt pork and beef, which was an entirely new diet, which was an entirely new product that people had never ate before. And they stopped delivering these food products and people were starving. And what was going on was that the food products that were being delivered to these various reservations were being sold and or traded off by the people who were receiving them. In this situation, the people who were receiving them were Indian agents who were responsible for ensuring that people remained on the reservation and to also take a tally of who was living there and, their activities, what they were doing. And so this was an uprising that was considered, according to the media, called the Dakota Uprising of 1862, where people needed to eat, and there were some conflicts in southern Minnesota, and some people ended up losing their lives on both sides meaning the white frontiers and the Dakota people, and some white frontiersmen lost their lives, and as a result of that, it led to the largest mass hanging in the United States history. And so moving forward to 2016, this photo is challenging or asking the question of how much has changed from 1868 to 2016. And the discussion that was going on at the time in regards to the pipeline was there was a lot of anti treaty rights conversation points that were going on, and as a result of that, there was a lot of misunderstandings that were happening by a lot of people, and as a result of those misunderstandings, it led to more than 750 arrests near the Standing Rock Indian Reservation.
What is the
And
current state of general Native Americans as it relates to reservations? Are the majority of Native American tribes living on reservations now?
okay, so good question. The majority of American Indian people, according to the United States Census and other various organizations that serve American Indian people, live in urban communities such as Chicago, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, New York City. Again, the majority of them live off of the community or off of the traditional reservation communities for various reasons. One of them is lack of economic development and or lack of a job. And so, like many others, they flee to the cities and start a new life and try as best as they can. And some make it, some don't. And as a result of that, a few generations move forward, and you have a generation, two, maybe three generations who've been living off of these old lands that their ancestors had negotiated to preserve for their descendants. So, you know, it's a really challenging aspect to identity, especially cultural identity. And you know, what does that mean for our future? We're seeing what this all means, of course, you know, as we talk about it, as we, you know, visit on these topics.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. So this is one of the photos you took this year recently, and it was published in Medium today. Justice for Brandon LaDucer.
Yeah.
Who is Brandon? Tell us about this guy.
Sure. So Brandon is a young man, a father of two, who was from Belcourt, North Dakota, which is the home of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. So earlier I said Ojibwe, Ojibwa, Chippewa. We could talk about more why those are differences, but they're the same tribe. There are some things that I cannot say in regards to what I know of him, but I didn't personally know him, but I knew members of his family, and they shared some really chilling details with me. And what it came down to is there was an interaction where the police were called based on misinformation that went to a private residence. And as police approached the private residence in this rural community, there were more than 10 police vehicles. And so regardless if you're in the city or in a small town, when you see more than two or even more than one police vehicle and your skin is colored, it doesn't usually end well. It you know, statistically, it ends in lots of bad things. And so there was an interaction, and there was a police killing. In this situation, there were multiple police jurisdictions that were involved. And because of the jurisdiction of where this happened, which was on the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation, it fell into the jurisdiction of the FBI, which they actually were not present at the time of the incident. And so it makes things very complicated for victims of crimes and or interactions like this. So this isn't being treated as a crime. This is being treated as a police-involved shooting, which is a language term. So a police-involved shooting can imply that a shot was fired when the police were involved or in the area. It doesn't mean that the police shot. It doesn't mean that the police were shot at. It doesn't mean anything in particular. So this man was shot and killed by Bureau of Indian Affairs Police to the best of our investigations right now. And The Bureau of Indian Affairs Police is a federally funded law enforcement agency that's funded by the Department of Interior. The Department of Interior oversees the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is the primary federal branch and bureau that interacts with all federally recognized tribes. And there are 576 of those tribes, and they're all different, and they all have different people. So each community has a different jurisdiction. For example, in my community, if it had happened in Wisconsin, the lead investigative unit would be the Wisconsin Department of Justice and not the FBI. And so, you know, there are lots of policies and procedures and laws that were passed well before we were born as to why these interactions and why these investigations are handled the way that they are. And so to answer your question, ideally is tell me about this guy. He was well loved. Obviously, he has 2 children. They are without a father. And the last words that anybody had heard from him were from his auntie. And she shared with me very intimately, which was included in the photo. I love you, Auntie. You're one of the best people I know. And, you know, that's not something we quite hear every day. And regardless if we hear it every day, if that's the last thing you hear from someone, that's gonna affect a life forever.
Absolutely. And just the similarity between that and George Floyd is pretty chilling, with his last words that are remembered as well. So these are some of the photos that you've captured along your journey. I'm wondering if you have a career in investigation or, you know, journalism. I mean,
Sure.
it's here.
Yeah, really good question. I started writing and publishing on various entrepreneurs and artists about 6 years ago, because I've been an artist and entrepreneur for years, and I know how challenging it is to one, promote yourself, and 2, to be supported and promoted to other newer folks. And so to return that favor, I started writing about different artists and so on and so forth. And not long after that, I ended up in various different protests and activities to address social change and activism, to a point where people knew that I was published, and they started to ask and share information with me, because that's the ultimate, you know, aspect of journalism is, am I able to communicate and converse with direct sources? Because if so, then that is the body or the meat and potatoes of the story. And so I can't just make something out of nothing. And so once that started happening, I started doing more investigative pieces to a point where people started to trust my ability to gather this information, to share this information, and to publish it with the public in a way that protects their integrity, in a way that protects some very intimate details, that leaves often victims vulnerable to a greater, wider public media who doesn't quite take the time. And that's one of the skills and aspects I'm learning about journalism, is that good stories require some patience, they require some time. And I've always been very confident in my writing, and encouraging people, but the photography is essentially the words that I see. This photo that you have up now, being right then and there, seeing Nakima Armstrong and her husband relentlessly lead these events and ensure nonviolence is very encouraging and is very beautiful. And why I'm there is I can learn from this. We can learn from this activity. And although it seems very negative, it's not. It's a very positive, it's a very beautiful thing that is attempting to address and bring balance to society. And society is so large, it's so big, that it is so challenging So now I actually am doing more investigative. I actually started my tenure with a new organization called Unicorn Riot, and we particularly do more investigative journalism, where we are investigating in many situations the government meaning the law enforcement, as well as various policymakers.
So um, there has been a lot of momentum around statues and taking down different figures in history um, across the country. What has been your experience with this?
Sure. It's been very interesting. So the photo that you have here depicts the statue of Christopher Columbus being pulled down from its base on the Minnesota Capitol grounds, which is in St. Paul. And this particular situation is very interesting because I was there documenting both video and photography, and there were some interactions with the Minnesota State Police and the people who were there, protesting, and who eventually pulled the statue down. And there was no real issues or attempts to prevent the situation. And so it almost seemed like they were willing to deal with the consequences, and what the consequences meant in this situation was whether or not they were going to criminally charge someone. So Minnesota in this situation is really unique because they are actually charging one person for a felony crime of destruction of property of damage more than $1,500. And so the statue and the damage that is estimated exceeds $150,000.
Wow.
And so I've seen other situations where statues have been pulled down, both live as well as through video. And it's a really interesting conversation. But essentially, I think that addressing the issue of systemic oppression, racism, and police brutality is leading to many other minute aspects of society that don't reflect the experiences and cultures of people who have been excluded from the table of public spaces and of the social fabric of this country. And, that can go into many other aspects of conversation too. But I think that it's a really interesting time. We're still seeing statues being pulled down, not only in the United States, but elsewhere throughout the world. And right now I'm working on a video piece for the approaching traditional Columbus Day, which is October 12th, I believe, October 13th.
Who cares?
Which is the next, yeah, right, which is the next court appearance of this person. So
yeah. Well, good. I mean, I'm all for, fighting the system, and I commend you guys and the coverage that you're giving of everything that's going on. And it almost feels like, it's been waiting, it's been festering, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we have our chance, and everybody's kind of in this mode. So it's really interesting to see.
Yeah, it's really interesting because ultimately, like, we can't control people, which is why we might see some, minute people or like just a small group of people who, may not care about things that you and I care about, and we can't expect them to care about the things that we care about. But nonetheless, it might lead to a statue being pulled down. It might lead to a storefront being broken into. Not that that is an excuse, but I get it. And I think about it from a very human point of view. Imagine someone you know and love, who you've known to be, not violent, who you know to be is very loving and caring of a community, who suddenly is a victim of police brutality. How is that going to make you feel? How is that going to change your narrative? How is that going to change your perspective and the participation of everything that's going on in our community right now? And I say that to say there was a recent man by the name of John Thompson, who was an African-American man over here who won his primary, and he was best friends with Philando Castile, who was murdered by police 4 years ago. And that changed his perspective. That changed his whole platform. That changed his whole existence. And when you go to these protests and you see this, and, you know, and people mistake that people are desiring and wanting of media attention. And let me say this way. There's no person of color that wants to be the center of media attention for one of their friends being killed by police. There's not a single person that I know that wants that. But if we don't speak out against it, it's, you know, as we're seeing, it's going to continue to repeat itself. And so what we're seeing as a society is enough is enough. And in a lot of people's words, we're not playing anymore. This is the end. This is going to stop happening.
It's here.
So, yeah.
Monumental change is here. And so you are a musician, you play the flute. How has that, so first of all, part of what you do with your music has led to sort of this, I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, has led to your involvement in a lot of the activism and a lot of the social justice work that you do, because there was a person who heard one of your songs, maybe Leonard Peltier, am I saying that correctly?
Peltier.
He's with the American Indian movement, and he is a prisoner.
Yes, he's actually been in prison for a little over 40 years. I know what it feels like to feel or to be unheard. I know what it feels like to be passionate and to not have that passion be supported. And when people often are protesting, and there's lots of reasons why people protest, a lot of it is unfair treatment and that big R word, racism. You know, that's a big issue. And so regardless if I know the people and I'm local or I'm around, I often end up joining people and supporting them. And just being another body to be there to support them is very encouraging and uplifting. And how my music has been involved with so much activism is that relating to Leonard Peltier, a really good friend of mine is the executive director of the Leonard Peltier Defense Committee, which has been going on for 40 plus years. And, you know, I would go to these protests and they would see me and say, hey, we would really appreciate it if you played some music for us. And so that led to one thing, and it led to another thing, and it led to many other really great opportunities and experiences where I would have never imagined that music does heal. I mean, you know, we hear these things from generations past that, you know, there's music of a movement or there's protest songs and so on and so forth. And I don't particularly make music like that, but I could see how music has definitely has contributed to many different movements and many different situations that are all of our people are involved in.
What types of flutes do you play? Are there different types of instruments?
Yeah, so there are different types. What I do is I research these old instruments that were collected in the late 1800s. Why they were collected varies from reason to reason. Often one of the reasons why they're collected is a family may have had a really valuable item and they traded it for their next meal. And then fast forward a few decades and these pieces end up in museums. And so you have what is considered a loss of cultural traditions and knowledge. And what I do is I study these various pieces from different regions. There are similarities, there are differences, but essentially they're pretty common amongst each other. The style and the way that they're made are very similar, but essentially the differences are they're just voice. They sound a little differently. If they're flutes, they're all going to be approached and be played very similarly.
How long have you been playing?
I started playing in front of people in 2004.
Oh, wow.
So I've been doing this for about 16 years now.
What was like that moment that you changed and said, okay, I'm gonna do this in front of people now?
Sure. So I had a couple of really good friends when I was going to college. I was going to Marquette at the time, and my friends were, I think, the president and vice president of a student org, and they needed more cultural performers. I think cultural then meant also ethnic. So they invited me to perform at this particular thing, and this event ended up being really, really big, and there were a number of people there that liked my performance so much that they invited me to their particular communities or schools. This was a random big event, and it's been pretty much been snowballing since. So then I went to those locations, and then the invitations went on from there, and it kind of just grew, and it's still growing in some ways exponentially.
So you have albums. You actually have, freaking albums. How many albums have you made over the years?
Sure. I've made 3 albums. I learn more each as I go. My newest album, which is the one on the left, I was curated. My album was selected by some curators to be a part of this statewide recognition program for musicians making new music in the state of Minnesota. So now that I live here, I can consider that as a new project here. The album was actually recorded in South Dakota. But people really, I'm still making music. So people like the music. They really appreciate this type of art. And I have to pay tribute to those who came before me, who have paved the path for me to want to learn more and want to continue on this craft of storytelling and flute playing, which is it's a very rare thing. There are people that do it, but there's not many.
Do you have a flute nearby?
Yeah, I do actually. This is a really nice flute. Can you see it?
Hold on, let me get a better view. Oh yeah, that's huge. Now, is that handmade?
Yeah, so I make them all. This little piece that's tied to the top, that's what makes the noise. I blow into the mouthpiece like this. What makes noise is my breath travels through and goes upward. And then there's a small hole right there.
Nice.
You can see it.
Yeah.
And so as I play it, like, so essentially what I try to do is I try to show people the different styles of flutes, the different woods, the types of woods make a difference in the voice. I use these decorations to talk about stories, where our stories teach morals and values. And believe it or not, people actually like to listen to people tell stories. Listening to a storyteller, like taking on the title of a storyteller, is such a big deal, regardless of what culture you come from, and let alone mine. But being a storyteller, people place great value into listening to these timeless tales of testing values and developing character. And so I use music and these old stories to talk to get people to slow down and think a little, and for I want people to read between the lines that we're not that different. We have some different traditions, and those traditions are different because we just have different experiences. We've
That's all.
just been doing different things, and not saying we're all trying to be uniform, but as we figure these things out, the best way to respect each other is to take that time and to be patient and to listen, you know.
Listen a little more, that's all. Well, I really appreciate you being here, Darren. We have to get out of here. I want to ask you the
Sure.
hugest favor. Would you please play a little something for us before we get out?
Sure, yeah. I'll play you a really nice song with this flute. There's 4 verses to the song. I'll play one verse.
Okay.
And this is called the Woodpecker Song. There's an old story that goes with it, but okay.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
It creates some kind of calm in the body.
Yeah, there's lots of different roles that music can play. This particular music is on the very medium level of the spectrum of how we listen to music. It's very relaxing. I've heard lots and lots of good things about relaxation and meditation with this instrument.
So I'm sold. I'm going to definitely be purchasing an album very soon.
Okay, you can find me on Apple
I was just gonna ask you,
or
shout it out.
however you guys listen to music. Just search my name, and I'm even on iHeartRadio. I'm even on TikTok. So
That's beautiful. Well, I wish you all the best, Darren. Thank you,
okay,
thank you for joining us. We will get out of here. I just want to quickly shout out naturally the G Spot and its sponsors. So shout out G Spot, Bo Black on vacation at TY Little, and Final Cut Multimedia. Thank you guys for all your support all this time and continued support. And thank you, Darren, for joining us. And we will see you all soon. Take care.
all right.
Bye.
See ya.